Hello everyone and welcome back to Rolling Through Negotiations. This is episode 88, guys, 88. So we are recording this one right here, right now in June 2025. Welcome. I'm Matthew Karakalakis. I'm the host of Rolling Through Negotiations. I'm a lawyer working in commercial law, dispute resolution. I'm also a mediator and I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I know what it's like trying to navigate high pressure negotiations, and it's exactly what we explore here on this podcast. If this is your first time listening, I hope you find something useful inside this one, in what we're sharing, what we're going to be discussing as well. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back. You're a legend. Love having you here. So, who's coming on this week? What's this one going to be all about? This week, we have James Dapperchi. He's the founder, the principal lawyer there at Grabberman Law. He also has an amazing series on social media called Coffee and a Case Note. James does a lot of work when it comes around directors' duties, Corporations Act stuff, litigation. So we touch on this. We go into the sort of things where negotiations are really powerful from the beginning, the startup phase of business, and how to get your values right to make sure that you don't end up in a legal dispute. I think you're going to enjoy this one. Without further ado, let's get into the show. Hang on. Before we go into this episode, let's do something really important. Let's acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands. Let's pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Let's go. Oh, hang on a second. One more thing. Just kidding. Let's go. So, James, we've given you a big and well-deserved wrap as an intro. You know, I'm pretty pumped to have you here. And you do, as I was saying, you do a lot of work in directors' duties and Corporations Act and all that sort of stuff too.
Look, I was grateful for the big wrap in the intro, Matthew. Yes, I do. I do a lot of work on the directors' duty stuff. Basically, the line I've got is like when co-owners don't get along. So, Matthew, if you and I were in business, we'd get along every day and it'd be fine. But there might be a moment where I move to Bali and you stay working hard on the business and I stay here sucking out dividends while you're on the tools. And, as time goes by, you might get a little bit more unhappy with me. And so often it's when co-owners don't get along tends to be the position for me. So directors' disputes, shareholders' disputes, sort of trustee beneficiary disputes, those sorts of things is what I specialize in. When people who own an asset together don't get along. Matthew, it would never happen to you and me, but I'm sure you can imagine some of the scenarios that it'd pop up in.
Your aims are pretty high there, James. Two commercially minded lawyers, coming together and having a business that's successful. It does happen, but James, I love the positivity. So I think it's really interesting when you look at things like directors' duties and you look at the real life context. Yeah, so some of the directors' duties have to act for proper purpose. You can't use financial information for your own purposes. That's not the purposes of the company. Avoiding conflicts, and there's a few more directors' duties as well. And they all make sense. Do you feel like sometimes there's a negotiation in fitting the meaning of a director's duty into the real life context and the real life situation that's taking place?
Yes is the short answer, Matthew. And you've hit the nail on the head, right? If you are dealing with a set of rules that a bunch of old white parliamentarians put in place 30 years ago that's meant to deal with the commercial realities of how businesses work today, you really are going to bump into issues when the rubber hits the road. And so if we run that scenario where, Matthew, you and I start a small local business that might be a small local gym, like serving a audience or something like that. And we might go, oh yeah, look, it's a company called James Matthew Pty Limited. The directors of it are going to be James and Matthew. Yeah. It'll be a bit of a hobby. Like we'll just invite our mates and we'll hire some space and we'll buy a bit of equipment and we'll just see how we go. It might feel like to you and I, things are nice and casual and we're just having a crack and we're basically just serving our mates and serving our community and trying to provide sort of a local spot for people to progress with their skills. Or what is happening at the same time as we're engaging in that project is that we're also accepting these really scary and profound duties and their duties owed to the company. And so it's sometimes a little difficult to understand. But James himself, this like flesh and blood and kind of 28% fat guy on the podcast right now, and Matthew, you personally, blood and bone and flesh, you owe duties to that new company we created, right? James Matthew Pty Limited. And so you might be offered a chance to start up a new fighting gym down the street. And if you were to get involved in that, that's probably a breach of your duties to James Matthew Pty Limited. And so while you might have started James Matthew Pty Limited to serve the community and to, just be a space for people to share an interest, there's a moment where the duties you've accepted by becoming a director, even though it started off quite casual, can really kind of bite when those practical issues come into play. And so often in my work, the work we do here at Graviman, you see this gap between, the rules, capital T, capital R, about how things should work, and the actual day-to-day commercial reality that, real small businesses and small enterprises are facing.
It's interesting when you look at these sorts of situations, because often I think directors' disputes come about because of steps that were missed from the very beginning. And it's kind of like when you make the cake. You're making a cake and you forget the eggs. Well, then whatever you do after that is just going to fall to pieces. And I think sometimes you can see that sort of thing happening when you're looking at directors' duties, can't you? You can see that, hang on a second, if these guys had have made sure that their values were properly aligned from the very beginning, if they had created a proper business plan, or the example you gave, James, one of the directors wants to go off and set up a fighting gym. If these guys were really, really clear from the very beginning who was going to be doing what, how the whole company and business was going to be work, what their duties were, making sure their values were in alignment, often then they can avoid the troubles down the track, can't they?
I love Michael Ruhlman analogy, Matthew. I love the recipe analogy, Matthew. It's perfect. It reminds me of this Michael Ruhlman recipe book. It's like my favorite cookbook, where he says the first rule, the first thing you've got to do in any cooking, this is the first step in every single recipe, is think.
Yeah.
Right. So it's easy for us to get in and be like, I'm cooking this. Let's go. But as you say, Matthew, if you take that kind of moment to sit down and be like, okay, there are all sorts of interesting opportunities and that sort of thing we can be pursuing, but let's just sit down, take that moment to think, take that moment to plan, take a moment to get an understanding of what we're trying to do. I think that's so right. And so many of these disputes come from 3 or 4 or 5 years down the track, where I say to you, hey, I was always going to set up this fighting gym with my brother, Matthew. Like, what are you talking about? And you go, well, it would have been nice to know that a few years ago before I invested the time and effort together into this project. So I think that's so true. Like, so many times in these sort of disputes, you have clients who kind of are wishing for a time machine of like, oh, if only I'd said over that cup of coffee we had in 2019, or if only I'd said over that beer we had at university, all those years ago, or whatever it might be, that this was going to be the plan, that I had this in mind. We might have avoided all this complexity over time. Yeah. So my kingdom for a time machine, Matthew, is often the great big regret that some of my clients have in this area, for sure.
This is where the values between the people that we're going into business with, the communications, and everybody really caring for each other as well as themselves, as well as the company, and operating in a way where there's this element of good faith, so that everyone's doing the right thing, everyone's caring for each other, and then this sort of growth can happen based on the right values from the very beginning. So I think this is really interesting when you look at directors' disputes and this kind of stuff too. But if you ever get that time machine, James, please, get a good IP license on it and sell us one too.
Yeah. Look, I'll buy a bit of Apple stock and, we'll sort some stuff out, Matthew. Don't worry, between you and I. But if I can just build on the point you wisely make there, and I'm sorry to keep coming with these martial arts analogies. I know nothing about martial arts.
I love them. I love your enthusiasm, James.
But what's that Mike Tyson line of just that, like, everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the mouth? Of like, even if you and I sit down and we make the perfect plan and we go, yep, these are all the things we're going to do, there are still market forces, competitor opening up next door, some weird zoning we've got to face, or some new technology that comes and disrupts us. So even if we sat down together and we tried to project every single possible outcome, there's still that element of like, okay, well done for doing that preparatory work and for trying to get all your ducks in a row. there's still the question of what happens next. And there's still the question of what happens when those external forces come to play.
Yeah, and when those external forces do come to play, this is when people like you, James, can jump in and help resolve the legal disputes. I think it's really interesting because something like 97% of cases that start out as litigation settle and don't go to final trial. But what about the cases you've been involved in? Do you have a moment, do you have a dispute that really stays in your mind as something that you learned? Sure, it was legal based, but also perhaps personality based, ethically based, a values driven lesson. And what's that all about for you?
For me, it's almost always about humility, right? Of no matter how confident I am in my view of the legal position, and no matter how clearly I'm conveying it, the lesson is always about humility. It's always about not wanting to be too smart for the situation. So the reflection I've got, and I won't get into profound detail, but there's a recorded case I was involved in that went up to the Court of Appeal, and there was a certain outcome. Now, that outcome was the outcome that was achieved in the Supreme Court, then achieved in the Court of Appeal, New South Wales, over the top of some very strong and good and high quality advocacy from the parties we were litigating against. Now, I discussed what I thought the outcome of the 2022 Supreme Court proceedings would be in 2021. And I was in a room with all the senior lawyers we were up against, and I explained my view and I shared my basis for it. And I was shown to be correct, right? And in my lack of humility, I was like, yeah, that's right. I'm a smart guy. I predicted what the Supreme Court was going to do. I predicted what the Court of Appeal was going to do. Ha, ha. I should get the gold star for being world's smartest lawyer. Rah, rah, rah. And I sort of came to reflect as time passed. I was like, why does this feel so hollow, right? Why does being the smart guy who told the big firms what was going to happen and then it turned out, what happened, ha, 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 ha. Why is that not, like, why doesn't that feel like a victory? And I've done some reflecting on it in the years that have passed since then to sort of say, well, if it's merely a victory to self-aggrandize and to brag and to big myself up, it's like, is that really the cathedral I'm trying to build with my career? Am I really just trying to be, ha, 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 I told you so, and that's what makes a good and fulfilling career? And I think the short answer is no. The short answer is, if I'd shown some humility then and tried to help everyone understand the basis for my thinking, and if I'd shown some humility, more humility subsequently, and tried to lead everyone through to the position I'd been lucky enough to reach a little earlier in my thought process, then there's a chance that the path of that litigation might have gone differently. So I look back on that as a time where I was on top of my legal skills, and I like to think I am now, but I failed in those interpersonal communication strategy skills. I failed in that test of how do I communicate? How do I bring people on the journey with me? Because winning, it's not necessarily about, ha, 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 I'm the smartest guy in the room, look what the Court of Appeal said. It could have been, and on one view should have been, much more about, well, I helped some people understand some things today, and that's what doing my job's about. So as you can tell, I can kind of reach that experience pretty quickly as one where, with a bit more humility, things might have gone a little differently.
That's beautiful, James, and I appreciate the humility that came with the vulnerability in this as well, in being able to share something that you learned in your own journey. If we can be humble in not trying to have our cake and eat it too every single time, but looking for some win-win outcomes along the way, then that's going to make the big job at the end a lot easier. So I think that humility is a beautiful piece to share. Interestingly, James, I learnt through BJJ that when I can fight martial arts with humility, I perform way better as well. Humility is absolutely a cornerstone principle to success. So I love the lesson that you shared.
it's a funny one, right? Of humility, I think is another way to think about self-knowledge as well. So I can imagine in a BJJ context, rather than going rah rah rah, I'm the biggest, baddest, scariest person in the gym, you might say, okay, I've got some strengths, some weaknesses, and I'm going to need to kind of think my way through and sort of learn my way through this scenario. So, as I say, even though I've got no experience in it, the analogy holds for me of if you're thinking carefully about what you're doing and you have an understanding of, it sounds a bit touchy-feely. If you have an understanding of who you are going into it, you're more likely to succeed. But it also builds on this point that I've got, that I spoke about before we recorded, Matthew, that I do think there's something peculiar about BJJ and practitioners. I don't know if it's just an accidental correlation, but a lot of people who think about business in a fairly well-organized, but also community-minded and also intellectually engaged manner, from time to time come out of this community. And I really, look, I'd like to use the opportunity on your podcast to put a question to you.
Beautiful.
Matthew, are there things peculiar to the kind of learning process you go through, or things peculiar to the number of times you get knocked down or you get embarrassed or, you learn something new, that you find kind of build a level of resilience in sort of business owners and in people coming through in their community that BJJ is peculiarly good at showing? I just feel like I keep bumping into people who are very effective in the way they do their work. It's like, oh yeah, by the way, 3 nights a week I'm doing this. But it seems to be a big part of the culture. Is there anything special going on there? I'm not auditioning because I'm sure I'd just get embarrassed very quickly, get my shoulder dislocated and my leg broken and whatever else. But is there something in the water at these BJJ gyms you need to share with us all?
Yeah, I think life is a beautiful teacher, and if we are aware, if we embrace life with the humility that you speak of, if we are conscious of the feedback that life is giving us along the journey, then that's a great platform to be able to improve, because you either lose or you learn or you win. But I believe that winning doesn't always come easily. So often it's going to be about a loss or a learning. And I feel like BJJ creates a safe space that provides a container in a lot of ways to deepen the lessons that we need in life. There's different pursuits. It doesn't have to be BJJ. There can be different pursuits. I'm not a very good runner, but I believe that if you go into running or you go into any other exercise, or you focus on a skill set, could be a musical instrument, could be knitting if that's your passion. I believe that if we fully embrace and create the space to be able to learn, to be able to grow, to overcome challenges, then those learnings can apply to all different types of contexts. And James, if we speak about BJJ, right? And you're someone who I know is keen, and you can sense some benefits from BJJ. What is it that would be holding you back from stepping onto a BJJ mat and doing a class?
Oh, easy. Fear. Mm-hmm. Fear of what, 2 things, like the fairly visceral fear of pain or injury, mm-hmm. and then the fairly social fear of shame and embarrassment. I think the fear of injury point's the easiest one to meet, and there's that degree of trust, right? Of, for those of us who don't often have that kind of sort of confrontational physical interaction happen often since they stopped playing rugby union 25 years ago, which is me. Mm-hmm. The first time you bop or come in contact with someone else's body part at an angle that you might not have been expected or might not have chosen, there's the potential issue for that to be not much fun. But I imagine you get over that in a matter of 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes of just getting into the rhythm. The shame point is the interesting one, right? That's the one that I think I can conjure up any number of different forms of that. I'm too old, I'm too busy, I'm too inexperienced. I don't understand how this fits in with my broader fitness goals. Excuse. And I could probably come up with another 15, 20 in the 200-meter walk or whatever it might be to the convenient local BJJ gym. And I think if we dig into all of those, a lot of those are about the fear we all have at being not very good at something you're trying to be good at. So if I was to accept that invite for that first session, I'd be like, well, I'm going to try to be okay at this, and I'm going to learn that I'm really not. And I'm probably 3 months away from being even the tiniest bit okay, and I'm probably 3 years away from being slightly okay, and I'm probably 3 decades away from being any good. And I think there's that degree of a love of comfort of like, I'm actually quite good at, look, for me, one thing I'm good at, and this probably speaks to my bizarre body shape, I'm quite good at lifting reasonably heavy weights on barbells. And so for me, I'm like, oh, I think BJJ people, they should do BJJ, and they'll be good at that. I might just stay here in my comfort zone because I know that I can squat 160, 170 kilograms, and that's something good that I feel comfortable. Well, like I'm pretty heavy myself, man. Like I might look not especially. Look, I'm not the world's biggest or strongest guy, but you know, for someone who's been doing that for a while, it's, you know, I only compare myself to people better than me. So I'm like, oh, Matthew, you just don't know how bad I am. You know, it's sort of the reflection I've got, and so there's that element of humility that I would lack. And so that's sort of a way of like framing that shame that I think would be super difficult to cut through. And my suspicion is there'd be people listening who'd be like, BJJ, yeah, great idea. But I just don't see how it fits for me. I've got some very me-specific excuses that it's difficult to get over. And I think, oh, I'm very busy. Oh, I'm doing my own exercise regime. Oh, what if I get injured? Oh, what if I get embarrassed? I can throw them all at you. And I think there's an element where you just need to push through them and give something a bit scary a try, because often trying those scary things is good for you over time. It's sort of, that's kind of where that thought process leads for me. I don't know, Matthew, is it a conversation you have a lot of, like the BJJ curious among your network who are nonetheless like, oh, maybe not for me, or oh, maybe not this year kind of thing? Are they the kind of excuses you face?
Yeah, I don't think I've had this conversation all that much, to be honest, James. And that's one of the reasons why I'm really enjoying this. And it's interesting that you've spoken about fear, and also we came a circle round back to humility. So I feel like humility has been a really big theme for this particular podcast episode. What's interesting is one of the reasons why I try to train 6 days a week. Normally I don't get 6 days in. Could be 4, 5, 6, something like this. Just depends on the week and what else is on. But something that one of the reasons that keeps me going back so much is the fear if I don't go. I know that by doing BJJ, it's helped my business do better. It's helped my life do better. My body feels better. I just feel good in every single way. It makes me more efficient in what I'm doing, sharper in thinking. It's just a total game changer. I can perform so much better outside of jiu-jitsu by doing jiu-jitsu. Yes. And so I'm fearful of not doing jiu-jitsu because I know how good it is. But at the same time, I can really appreciate the points when you say about the shame element. How can we put ourselves in that place of humility when we know that we're going to lose? But sometimes that journey is the greatest gift. Sometimes the ability to be placed in a place of vulnerability is a beautiful gift in its own. And I feel like when you speak about the other couple of other things you said, James, one was about the possibility of injury and pain. And absolutely, I guarantee you, mate, if you started jiu-jitsu, you're going to get injury, you're going to experience pain. But do you know what's really interesting on that too, James? Is I think in the long run, there's a really good chance that you'll have more pain and more injury from not doing jiu-jitsu or from not doing a particular sport that you love than if you do it. So before we came on today, you said you've been doing Pilates. And I think Pilates is something that's amazing as well. Probably is safer and less likely to get you injured than what jiu-jitsu is. But something
I hope so.
Yeah. But I think that you look at the extreme and you get somebody who doesn't do exercise, doesn't do any particular sport, and I think that their long-term consequences of their body and their ability to move freely is going to really suffer. And I believe that a beautiful part of life is the way that we can express ourselves and the way that we can be and move and be free in our bodies. And we want to be able to keep that alive. And the only way to keep that alive is to move and use it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I think that's so difficult to argue with, right? Of like, there's a version of Matthew where in 30 years' time you're doing Tai Chi in the park, Matthew, and you're just moving like very, very slowly through these movements, and it's not light years away from the BJJ background you have, and it's about embracing what we're able to do in the moment we're able to do it. The verb I'm really not enjoying at the moment is like calcification of like I haven't passed a rugby ball in about it was only about 6 or 9 months. I helped coach a touch footy team earlier this year and late last year, and I just let rip with a movement that was quite familiar to me from muscle memory, and grabbed at my shoulder immediately afterwards. And I think it almost comes, Matthew, to the point you're making of that kind of use it or lose it point, right?
Yes.
Of the injuries you might face of getting your knee bopped or getting your shin bruised or getting your ankle in a difficult angle or whatever it might be. Yes, all of those things may occur. And, the number of ACLs in middle-aged blokes, still playing round ball football or whatever analogy you want to draw, that's all still real, right? That's all still happening. But the comparable injury or maybe that the comparable negative health impact, I suppose is probably the way to frame it, is the sort of counter example of like, yeah, okay, a knee reconstruction, that's very unfortunate, but let's run the counter scenario where you haven't moved your body for 15 years and let's think about the health impacts of that. So I think that comparison is a really good one.
Got to be sure that we don't forget our body in the midst of the busy day, and just make sure we keep it as a priority, because everything becomes easier, we negotiate better, we're more efficient when our body's smooth.
Yep. And you only get one of them, right? The idea of like, oh yeah, I'll deal with that another time. At the moment, I got to make some money. Oh yeah, I'll deal with that another time. At the moment, I got to do something else. It's like, well, yeah, but how much are you asking? Like, how much are you planning to put it through for, before you pay it the attention it needs, before you give it the upkeep it needs? And I continue to be guilty of that. I'm sure I'm guilty of that today. I'm guilty of it yesterday. I'll be guilty of it tomorrow in any number of ways. But I think it's a good way to ground your thinking about, yeah, well, I mean, for me, the Pilates example is something I do because I should. I take zero joy from it, but I'm confident it's a very much brush your teeth, eat your greens, go for a run sort of thing of like, it's important to do. And I don't grind my teeth through it, but almost, right? It's not a joyful, exciting, life-giving experience for me. I know it can be for many people. And so there's that element I find of being prepared to embrace the the nuts and bolts, eating your greens, taking your vitamins element of the vessel that is carried through life, because you don't have much of a legal career if you're dead by 55. So it's fairly important to keep these things rolling along.
Yeah, perhaps the humility that you speak of in terms of the lessons in law and the journey of growth that comes with learning that humility that makes you an even better lawyer. Perhaps that same humility can be learned and demonstrated in different places like Pilates, and then it comes back to your legal career and makes you a better lawyer again. So things that we do outside of the legal career come back into our legal career to make us better as lawyers.
That's the plan.
Awesome.
That's the plan. And until someone gives me an alternate fact pattern, I'll act as if that's correct. I've been wrong before. Matthew, I'm not sure you've ever been wrong, but I've certainly been wrong many times. And I may well be wrong about this, but I guess we'll have to see.
Yeah. James, words of wisdom that you would love to share with our listeners as we wrap this amazing episode up? Yeah.
Look, if we think broadly about what those of us who are sort of rolling through negotiations are trying to achieve, I think I'd come back to that anecdote I told further, where there's always going to be so much value in thinking about the other person, thinking about the other parties when you're working through, especially a commercial negotiation, right? So the suggestion I'd make is to try to avoid making the error I made that I referred to earlier. So there might be people listening who might have had an experience like mine or like yours, Matthew, of like, I won all the negotiations, ha ha ha, I'm the winner. Often there's a through line where, standing over the broken, body of your negotiation opponent isn't actually the outcome you're after. The outcome you're after is more collaborative. So the only words of wisdom I've got are to say, I'd encourage you to try to avoid making a mistake of the kind I made that I referred to earlier, and try to embrace that humility and embrace trying to empathize with people on the other side of what you're up to as much and as fully as you can. That's
a really good point. And when you say this collaborative piece, it takes me back to your fear of jiu-jitsu. It takes me back to what you were saying before as well, in that one of the reasons why, if you were to start jiu-jitsu, you'd be well looked after in any good gym that you went to, is that everybody in the gym knows that it's the collaboration of jiu-jitsu that is where everybody learns. And so when you went along to a gym, there'll be people sharing things with you, appreciating the collaboration, the opportunity to share with you, because it absolutely helps them grow as well. So, James, who knows? Maybe when you come back on Rolling Through Negotiations, we have a chat about James' jiu-jitsu journey. Who knows?
Look, it'll be a negotiation we roll through. I think I'm just going to be open-minded about it. I'm going to take my own advice to be open-minded about it. So I'll have to bear that in mind. No, I really appreciate the invite and really appreciate the chance to sort of chat through these things, Matthew. As you've heard, sort of, I'm a big fan, big admirer, and it's really nice to be able to sort of sit down and have a chance to chat with you about it.
Beautiful. I'm a big fan of yours as well, James. I love your coffee and a case note stuff you do. So, guys, if you want to check out some more of James, check out his coffee and a case note. He does it really, really well. His work's pretty inspirational there too. Remember, if you've enjoyed this podcast episode, if you're a fan of Rolling Through Negotiations podcast, subscribe, leave that 5-star review, because it really does help us keep these episodes rolling out. Till next week, each and every single Thursday, brand new episodes of Rolling Through Negotiations come out. See you next week. See you next time. Us.